Chapter 5. The Black Whelp. Digging was slow work. It included rolling out of a place a number of big boulders. These went crashing down the mountain. At length, the burrow turned and squeezed between two mighty rocks which defied all efforts to budge them. "We'll have to try the dog," said Jim. "He'll get to the wolves all right, and he'll destroy 'em, I guess, but he won't fetch 'em out of the den. So we'll hang a piece of rope onto him and haul him out every time he gets a hold of one." Johnny looked on with some misgivings while the old man fastened a loop around the hindquarters of the husky and urged him into the tunnel. The dog wormed himself through the narrow opening, then moved quickly out of sight. There was a sudden, violent barking mixed with growls and yelps. "Now pull!" Carefully, they drew out the struggling dog. He was tightly gripping one of the brown pups and still shaking it. Jim looked it over, then laid the limp body on one of the flat rocks and sent the dog in again. In this way, they secured the 3 brown and the 2 nearly black whelps. The dog showed no more interest. "That's the last of 'em, I guess," remarked Jim. "It's funny, though, 'cause this pair of wolves always raises 6 in a litter. Perhaps the old limper carried one away with her. If so, it certainly will grow up to be a bigger fiend than any wolf around here now. She knows how to teach him." The life of the last pup hung in the balance. This one was the stout black fellow who earlier had shown his prowess in stealing choice food from his brothers. He had been clever enough to dig himself partly into the soft shale back of the den, and thus hide the greater part of his body behind a pile of loose stones and earth. Here he cowered with only his sharp nose and bright eyes exposed. Jim seemed satisfied with his haul, but the husky suddenly grew energetic again and re-entered the burrow for another look. His body obscured the light, so he could only guide himself by feeling his way and sniffing. Suddenly he encountered a furious bite on the nose. With a piercing yell, he backed away. Jim took this as a signal and hauled hard on the rope. The husky was dragged out to daylight, but this time had nothing to show for his effort. "There's something still in there," muttered Jim. "Try it again, you mutt." In went the dog with alacrity. There was silence, then another piercing yell, followed by furious barking. When this subsided, Jim pulled again on the rope. Out came the husky, every hair on his back standing straight up, but he had nothing in his jaws. He was tugging and fighting against the rope. "What is it?" asked Johnny. "Acts like an old wolf was in there. But that can't be, or that dog would have gotten the 5 whelps. Must be a real fighting youngster. Go get him, you cowardly cur." This time the fight was sharp and bitter. Then the dog's yells drowned everything, and he suddenly appeared backing out by his own efforts, gamely tugging against a writhing, fighting pup, which he held by the loose skin over its shoulder. Jim instantly pounced on the wolf and held it down. The dog let it go and pranced about the pair, barking insanely. "Pull my belt loose," called Jim, "and make a collar for this black cuss. This is real luck." Johnny slipped the belt loose and cut a convenient length from the buckle end. Jim fitted it with one hand and showed where to make a hole. In another minute, he had it tightly on the cub's neck and fastened to the end of a short, heavy wire. Johnny then, under his direction, drove a stake and fastened the other end of the wire tightly to it. A few heavy boulders made the stake safe from being pulled out and left only a narrow lane by which an animal might reach the pup. Then Jim took his weight off the wolf and jumped away just in time to avoid a bite. The black, woolly youngster rushed and jerked to free himself, then crouched down with ears back and sinister growls coming from his throat. "Great little sport," commented Johnny. "What a wolf that one would have made," was Jim's remark. He was setting the steel traps in the narrow space between the boulders, using utmost care to hide them in the dirt. "And did anyone ever see such a solid black color on a pup? Now, you varmint," continued the old man, "do your quacking. You're a decoy." A few minutes later, the two men, with a dog and their laden pack horse, were moving down the valley, leaving the little black wolf tied to his stake. Jim said nothing until they had rounded the base of the mountain. Then he halted the cavalcade. "Now, Johnny, go back along the other side of the ridge, keeping out of sight of the big timber until you're directly above the den. Then take a stand where you can watch and shoot if the traps don't work. Remember that when the mother comes, she'll come quick. Stay there until dark if you have to. I'll take the dog away." With that, the old man resumed his march to the cabin. "You'll get your chance." He stopped to call over his shoulder. Arrived at the right spot, Johnny propped his rifle conveniently among the rocks and lay there peering in the valley. The den was farther than he had expected, probably 200 yards or more. He could plainly see the pup through his binoculars. It was chewing the wire and straining at the stake. An hour passed. So still was Johnny that a mountain chipmunk nearly ran over his legs on its way to a patch of grass. Two marmots, much larger than the chipmunk, were moving among the stones to the right. Now and then they stood on their hind legs to look around. Below and on the opposite slope, the snow lay like a great blanket. A shadow crossed the face of the sun. Johnny cocked his eye upwards and saw a golden eagle flying high overhead. Suddenly it turned and circled. Around and around it soared. The marmots scurried to their burrows and stood within a jump of safety, watching the huge bird, and at intervals sending out a warning in the form of a sharp whistle. Almost imperceptibly, the eagle was coming closer to the earth. Johnny realized then that it had spotted the pup and was looking the ground over before striking. He cocked the rifle. Then a movement in the timber caught his attention. Against the background of the snow, a black animal was hurrying toward the den. It limped slightly. Suddenly, it quickened its pace. The eagle, still hesitating, was directly over the pup. Like a streak, the old black wolf burst out of the timber and came charging up the rocks. The eagle was hovering now, not 20 yards in the air, its clawed feet already hanging loosely. Then it dropped like a stone with half-folded wings, cutting the air head first until it caught, out of the tail of its eye, a glimpse of that furiously running form. Almost down at the earth, the bird thrust out its wings and veered away. The wolf raged after it, but too late. Up it flapped toward the peaks. Johnny had not heard the pup call the mother, yet somehow she had learned of the danger. Never far away, she had been on the watch and had understood the actions of the eagle. What would she do now, he wondered. Running back toward the den, she suddenly stopped in her tracks to sniff the air. Now she circled and came toward the place from the far side by jumping from boulder to boulder. Arrived where she could look down on the pup, she stood watching him and studying the changed conditions. Johnny, in his excitement, sat up to see more clearly. Instantly, the mother looked in his direction. The quick movement had somehow caught her eye. Without a moment's hesitation, she leaped down beside the pup and tried to pull him up by the neck. The wire jerked him away from her. Then she understood and bit the wire wildly. Her teeth found the leather collar. It fell off as if cut by a knife. She seized the pup and leaped for the top of the boulder, but her burden was too heavy and cumbersome. She slipped down sideways and landed with one foot in the lane where the traps were set. There was a spurt of dirt as the steel jaws leaped up. Her foot was caught. Over she rolled with a pull of the chain, the pup being hurled out of danger by the sudden check. Then she was up again, a terrific leap or two, and she was chewing at the trap. Johnny could not believe his eyes when all at once he saw her free and running for the timber, and behind her struggled the woolly black pup, awkward and rumpled, but working his legs with might and main. A rifle bullet cut the air over their backs, but it was badly aimed. In fact, old Jim, had he been there, would have said that it was not aimed at all. The only trophies Johnny brought back to the cabin were some black hairs and a wolf's long toenail, which only proved that the mate of Old Gray was lucky, and had struck the edge of the trap instead of the middle of the pan.